Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 9.2a. I've entitled this video, Washington's Challenges at Home. This video is going to cover pages 252 to 254. Trouble in the new nation. Washington faced difficult challenges while in office. Britain and France were pushing the United States to get more involved in their conflicts. President Washington stood firm against this pressure. Native Americans, aided by the British and Spanish, fought the westward advance of American settlers. In addition, there was growing unrest from within the American population. The Whiskey Rebellion. The new government wanted to collect taxes on some products made in the United States. In 1791, Congress passed a tax on the manufacture and sale of whiskey, a type of alcohol made from grain. Western Pennsylvania farmers were especially upset by this tax. Their anger turned into violence in July of 1794. An armed mob attacked tax collectors and burned down buildings. This protest, called the Whiskey Rebellion, alarmed government leaders. They viewed it as a challenge to the power of the new government. Washington sent federal troops to meet the challenge. His actions sent a strong message to the public. The government would use force to maintain order. Question number 1. What did Congress place a tax on in 1791? Whiskey, which is a type of alcohol made from grain. Question 2. What was the Whiskey Rebellion? Well, this was much like, if you think about the Boston Tea Party, this was another anger of a tax on a liquid. This time it was whiskey instead of tea, but these farmers from western Pennsylvania didn't feel like the tax was fair. They felt like it unfairly punished the farmers, and so they turned their anger into an armed violent conflict. They attacked tax collectors, they burned down some buildings. Fortunately for them, Washington, while he did send out troops to stop it, he shows them mercy, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So why did the whiskey tax happen to begin with? Well, three things. The federal government wanted to show that they did have the power, and in the Constitution it does say Congress has the power to tax, so it wasn't like they were doing anything illegal. And the problem that the people had in 1776 was no taxation without representation. And the Congress then would say, you have representatives in this Congress. This is a tax that people in Congress voted for. It also would raise money for the federal government, as we were in a lot of debt. We needed that, and that would help us reduce our national debt from the war. So that's one main way that governments can pay off their debts, is to have taxes. Now, reasons against the whiskey tax was it unfairly put the debt payment on farmers, and they didn't have a lot of income to begin with at that time. It made their income smaller, and it made whiskey more expensive, and it made shipping more expensive as well. So there were some agreements for the whiskey tax. There was also some arguments against the whiskey tax, but it did happen. Now, this is a slide that's not in your book, but this is a slide that I've added from a previous presentation of this, because I think this is important to talk about, and that is Washington's mercy. President Washington responded quickly. He showed his abilities as a military leader once again. He called up the militia and dispatched them to Pennsylvania. When the rebels heard that thousands of troops were marching against them, they fled back to their farms. Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton wanted the leaders of the rebellion executed, but Washington disagreed and pardoned them. He believed that the government had shown its strength to all. Now it was time to show mercy. The Whiskey Rebellion tested the will of the new government. Washington's quick response proved to Americans that their new government would act firmly in times of crisis. The president also showed that those who disagreed with the government, that violence would not be tolerated. So this gets me to question 4, the thinking question. Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton wanted to execute the leaders of the rebellion, and yet Washington disagreed and pardoned them. A pardon is a government, like an official, you're forgiven. How does this show President Washington's wisdom? Well, think about it. We had just fought a Revolutionary War over 2 decades before that over a tax on tea. And that person was King George III. His name is George. If this leader, George, were to kill people for being upset about this, he felt like that was going to send the same message that King George III had done. So he decided, hey, we put down the rebellion. They've learned their lesson. Enough is enough. And so he showed mercy. And I think that set a stage for American history, that the president didn't have to be some dictator that was going to, kill everybody who disagreed with them. So this was an important moment for President Washington, and this is why he's my favorite president. One of the reasons why. Challenges in the West. Washington worried about ongoing European interest in the Northwest Territory. The British and Spanish were trying to stir up Native American anger against American settlers in the region. To block these efforts, Washington signed treaties with Native American groups. Yet American settlers ignored the treaties and moved on to lands promised to Native Americans. Fighting broke out between the two groups. And you've seen that throughout our history, how that's happened over and over again between the Native Americans and the American settlers. Again, Washington decided to use force. He sent an army under General Arthur St. Clair to restore order in the Northwest Territory. In November of 1791, St. Clair's army met a strong Native American force led by Little Turtle, a Miami chief. More than 600 U.S. soldiers died in the battle. It was the worst defeat U.S. forces had ever suffered against Native Americans. Question number 5. While Washington was president, how were the Spanish and the British making his life more difficult? Well, they were trying to stir up Native American anger because the British and Spanish didn't want to see America be successful and grow as an empire. And so they were sort of like, hey, Native Americans, you shouldn't be putting up with this. So they're just egging on the Native Americans to fight back for lands that were rightfully theirs. But they wanted to see America sort of like their power neutered and kept in check. Question number 6. How did President Washington try to solve the problems being caused by the Spanish and the British? Well, he had treaties signed with the Native American groups. So his thoughts were, hey, we can get along with these Native American groups by signing treaties. We agree to peacefully split up the land. The problem was, though, number 7. Even though Washington did have these treaties signed, fighting did take place. Why? Well, because American settlers were ignoring the treaties and they were moving on to lands that had already been promised to Native Americans. And we have heard that story time and time again so far, where treaties are made and American settlers break the treaties. And of course, the Native Americans are left with nothing to do but fight back. Question number 8. Why was the battle between St. Clair and Little Turtle a significant battle in American history? Well, at that point, it was the deadliest battle that Americans had ever fought and lost against Native Americans. Americans hoped an alliance with France would help them achieve full control in the West. The possibility of French involvement led Great Britain to take action. In 1794, the British urged Native Americans to destroy American settlements west of the Appalachians. The British also began building a new fort in Ohio. Native Americans demanded that settlers who were living north of the Ohio River leave the area. In response, Washington sent Anthony Wayne, a Revolutionary War general, to the region. In August 1794, Wayne's army defeated more than 1,000 Native Americans under Shawnee Chief Blue Jacket. The Battle of Fallen Timbers, near present-day Toledo, Ohio, crushed the Native Americans' hopes of keeping their land. In the Treaty of Greenville of 1795, Native American leaders agreed to surrender most of the land in what is now Ohio. And now we can answer the rest of the questions. Question number 9. What country did America hope that if we created an alliance with them, we would be able to control the West? France. Question 10. What were 2 ways the British acted against the Americans at that time? Well, Britain didn't like France, they didn't like us, and so what they did was they did 2 things. Number 1, they urged Native Americans to destroy our settlements west of the Appalachians, and secondly, they began to build a new fort in Ohio. Question number 11. Why was the Battle of Fallen Timbers an important battle between the Americans and the Native Americans? Well, in this battle, the Native Americans were crushed, and what that did is it basically stopped their defense against their lands, and it allowed the Americans to take over much of their land. With question number 12, what did the Treaty of Greenville do to most of the land in Ohio? It gave it to the Americans, and you can see a map of that right here. You can see most of Ohio goes to the Americans in that treaty, and this is just a sign of things to come, where the Native Americans sign treaties, and then we break the treaty, and then we fight, and then we use force to take their lands, and then we make more treaties. And this history of how we treat the Native Americans would be a very recurring theme in our history. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, 1776, commanded the militia in battle against taxation. 1794, commanded the militia in battle to enforce taxation. Yes, George Washington was on 2 sides of fights against taxation. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.